Moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of ancient pines, casting ethereal shadows across Olathi's trembling form. The night air, thick with the scent of sage and wild jasmine, did little to mask the metallic tang of blood that stained her hands. Not her blood. His. The bond mark on her shoulder burned with an intensity that threatened to bring her to her knees, but she remained standing, her golden eyes fixed on the chaos before her. The sacred clearing, once a place of peace and ritual, now crackled with tension and unspoken threats. The pack gathered in a wide circle, their bodies half-shifted between human and wolf forms, muscles rippling beneath skin that couldn't decide whether to sprout fur. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, some filled with fear, others with anticipation. This was unprecedented. A mate bond rejection ceremony hadn't been performed in over 3 centuries. "You can't just walk away from this," Kitchi's voice thundered across the clearing, his massive frame silhouetted against the rising moon. "We are bound by something greater than your petty desires for freedom. The ancestors themselves witnessed our union." His words carried power, each syllable attempting to wrap around Olathi like chains, trying to bind her will to his. Olathi's fingers traced the intricate patterns of her ancestral tattoos, each line pulsing with the power of generations before her. The markings had been with her since birth, a legacy of her bloodline that even her grandfather couldn't explain. Now, as she stood defiant before her former mate, they burned with newfound purpose. "The bond is broken, Kitchi. You made sure of that when you betrayed not just me, but everything our people stand for." Her voice carried across the clearing, steady despite the tremors racking her body. "I've seen the truth in the archives. The real reason why my grandfather pushed for our mating." Around them, the pack shifted uneasily. Some of the older members exchanged knowing glances, while the younger ones watched with barely concealed confusion. The politics of pack hierarchy had always been complex, but this was something else entirely. Elder Sequoia stepped forward, his weathered face grave with concern. His traditional robes, adorned with symbols of protection and wisdom, seemed to absorb the moonlight. "What has been done cannot be undone without consequence, the price of a broken bond. I don't care about the price." Kitchi's roar shook the trees, sending a flock of startled ravens into the night sky. His eyes, once a warm amber, now blazed with an unnatural crimson glow. The darkness around him seemed to pulse, responding to his rage. "She belongs to me. The ancestors themselves blessed our union. The prophecy must be fulfilled." Several pack members took involuntary steps backward. The mention of the prophecy, that carefully guarded secret, caused a ripple of whispers to sweep through the gathering. Even Elder Sequoia's usual composure faltered for a moment. "No one belongs to anyone," Olathi's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Not anymore. Not after what I discovered in the council's archives." She pulled a worn leather journal from her jacket, her grandfather's private writings. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about the experiments? About what really happened to my parents?" The silence that followed her words was deafening. Elder Sequoia's sharp intake of breath confirmed what she had long suspected. The secrets ran deeper than anyone had dared to admit. The old wolf's eyes darted between Olathi and Kitchi, calculating, weighing options that had suddenly become very limited. Kitchi's laugh was hollow, devoid of warmth. "You think those dusty scrolls tell the whole story? Your grandfather knew what he was doing when he arranged our mating. He knew the prophecy. He knew what you would become, what we would become together." His form flickered, the beast within pushing against his human skin. "The power in your blood, Olathi. It was never meant to be contained by one person alone." "My grandfather is dead," Olathi spat, even as pain lanced through her heart at the mention of the man who had raised her. "And so are the lies he built our lives upon. I know about the others, Kitchi, the failed attempts before me. How many died because of this obsession with power?" The pack stirred uneasily as energy crackled through the air. Something ancient and powerful was awakening, drawn by the intensity of their confrontation. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with forgotten magic, responding to the challenge to ancient laws. Elder Sequoia raised his hands, ancient symbols glowing faintly on his palms. The balance must be maintained, he warned, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. A broken bond releases forces beyond our control. Already the darkness gathers. Look. He gestured to the shadows that had begun to writhe and twist unnaturally around the clearing's edge. As if in response to his words, shadows seemed to deepen around Kitchi, writhing like living things. His next words came out as a growl. You want freedom, little wolf? Then run. Run as far as you can. But remember this. What flows in your veins, what makes you who you are, it's bound to me. And I will never stop hunting what's mine. Olathi felt the first tremors of his power, reaching for her, trying to reclaim what had been severed. The bond mark on her shoulder pulsed painfully, responding to his call. But something else stirred within her. Something older than pack laws, older than mate bonds. The power her grandfather had tried to harness, the power that had killed her parents, now sang in her blood with its own wild song. With a swift motion, she pulled the ceremonial dagger from her boot, the one her grandmother had given her on her 18th birthday. The blade gleamed with old magic, symbols etched into its surface coming alive under the moonlight. I choose my own path now, she declared, drawing the blade across her palm. Blood welled up dark against her skin. By blood and bone, by moon and stone, I reject this bond. I reject the prophecy. I reject the destiny others chose for me. The night exploded into chaos. Kitchi lunged forward, his form blurring between man and beast. But Elder Sequoi's barrier of light held him back. The pack scattered as ancient magic surged through the clearing, responding to Olati's blood offering. Her tattoos blazed with brilliant light, each symbol rewriting itself, breaking free from the patterns that had bound her since birth. The power built to a crescendo. Olathi caught a glimpse of something in Kitchi's eyes. Not just rage or possession, but fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing the power he'd thought was his birthright. And in that moment, she knew she'd made the right choice. The bond shattered with a sound like breaking glass, sending shockwaves through the sacred ground. As Olathi's blood dripped onto the earth, new patterns formed in the dirt around her feet. Patterns that spoke of choices yet to come, of paths not yet taken. Dawn broke over the city skyline, painting the world in hues of amber and gold. Olathi stood at the window of her small apartment, her reflection a ghostly overlay on the urban landscape below. 3 days had passed since the ritual, since she'd severed the bond that had defined her life for so long. The physical distance from the packlands did little to ease the ache in her chest, a hollow space where the connection to Kitchi had once resided. She traced her fingers over the faded mark on her shoulder, now nothing more than a silvery scar. The power that had surged through her during the ritual still hummed beneath her skin, unfamiliar and wild. Her tattoos, once static, designs passed down through generations, now seemed to shift and change with her moods, responding to this newfound energy. A soft chime from her phone broke the morning silence. Another message from Elder Sequoia. Olathi, please reconsider. The balance is shifting. The old magics stir. We need you here. She deleted the message without responding. The truth she'd uncovered in her grandfather's journals weighed heavily on her mind. How could she return to a place built on so many lies? A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Olathi tensed, her senses immediately on high alert. She hadn't told anyone where she was staying, had taken every precaution to cover her tracks. Slowly, she approached the door, her body instinctively shifting into a defensive stance. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "An old friend," came the reply, the voice achingly familiar. "One who owes you more than you know." Olathi's breath caught in her throat. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door, revealing a face she hadn't seen in years. "Niabi," she whispered, taking in the sight of her childhood friend. Niabi's once vibrant eyes were now clouded with exhaustion, her clothes travel-worn and stained. "How did you find me?" Niabi offered a weak smile. "I've always been able to find you, remember? Even when we were pups playing hide-and-seek in the forest." Her expression grew serious. "May I come in? There's much we need to discuss." Olathi stepped aside, allowing Niabi to enter. As she closed the door, she noticed the intricate tattoos on Niabi's arms, similar to her own, but with subtle differences that spoke of a different bloodline, a different destiny. "You broke the bond," Niabi stated, her eyes fixed on Olathi's shoulder where the mark had once been. "I felt it, even from across the country. It was like a earthquake in the spirit world." Olathi nodded, gesturing for Niabi to sit. "It was the only way. After what I learned about my grandfather, about the experiments." She trailed off, the weight of those revelations still fresh and painful. Niabi's expression darkened. "I know. That's why I'm here. Olathi, what you discovered, it's only the beginning. There's so much more at stake than just your bond with Kichi." "What do you mean?" Olathi asked, a sense of foreboding settling in her stomach. Niabi reached into her bag, pulling out a worn, leather-bound book similar to the one Olathi had found in the archives. "This belonged to my grandmother. She was part of the council, back when your grandfather first proposed the breeding program." Olathi's eyes widened. "Breeding program? I thought it was just about me and Kichi." Niabi shook her head, her voice low and urgent. "It was never just about you two. Your grandfather, he had this vision, a way to create the perfect alpha, one who could unite all the packs under a single rule. But the magic required, it was dark, Olathi. It twisted people, destroyed lives." As Niabi spoke, images flashed through Olathi's mind, fragmented memories of her parents, of whispered arguments and tearful goodbyes. She had always been told they died in an accident, but now... "My parents," she whispered, realization dawning. "They were part of this, weren't they?" Niabi nodded solemnly. "They were some of the first test subjects. Your mother, she was like you, Olathi. Special. The tattoos, the connection to the old magics. It runs in your bloodline, but the experiments they pushed too far. When your mother became pregnant with you, the power it unleashed, it was too much for them to control." Olathi felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew, about her past, about her place in the pack, was crumbling away. But why? Why go to such lengths? Niabi's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Because of the prophecy, the one that speaks of a great unifier, a wolf who would bring all the packs together and usher in a new age of power for our kind. And they thought that would be me. Or the child Kichi and I would have? Olathi's voice shook slightly as the implication sank in. "Yes, but Olathi, you have to understand. The prophecy, it's not what they think it is. My grandmother, she discovered the truth before she died. The unification it speaks of, it's not about power or control. It's about balance, about reconnecting with the old ways that we've lost." Outside, the city was coming to life, the sounds of traffic and distant sirens a stark contrast to the weight of history and magic that filled the small apartment. Olathi moved to the window again, her mind racing. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've broken the bond, rejected the path they set out for me. What does that mean for the prophecy? For the pack?" Niabi stood, joining Olathi at the window. "That's why I'm here, breaking the bond. It set things in motion, Olathi. The old magics are stirring, and not just in our territory. Shifters across the country are feeling it. Dreams, visions, powers awakening that haven't been seen in generations." Olathi turned to face her friend, a mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. "And Kichi? The council?" Niabi's expression hardened. "They won't give up easily. Kichi, the bond breaking has changed him. The darkness that was always there, it's growing stronger. He's convinced that if he can reclaim you, force the bond back into place, he can still fulfill the prophecy as he understands it." A chill ran down Olathi's spine as she remembered the look in Kichi's eyes that night in the clearing, the possessiveness, the hunger for power. "We can't let that happen." "No, we can't," Niabi agreed. "But we're not." alone in this fight, Olathi. There are others, shifters from different packs, even some humans who know the old ways. We've been waiting, watching, preparing for this moment. What moment? Olathi asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Niabi's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. The moment when we reclaim our true heritage, not as conquerors or rulers, but as guardians of the balance between the human world and the spirit realm. The prophecy isn't about creating some all-powerful alpha. It's about remembering who we truly are. Olathi felt something stir within her, a resonance with Niabi's words that went beyond mere understanding. The power that had awakened during the bond-breaking ritual surged, and for a moment her tattoos glowed with an inner light. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Olathi admitted, her voice soft but steady. I've spent so long trying to fit into the role they created for me. I'm not sure I know who I really am anymore. Niabi placed a hand on Olathi's shoulder. Her touch warm and reassuring. That's why the journey ahead is so important. It's not just about stopping Kichi or unraveling your grandfather's plans. It's about rediscovering yourself. And in doing so, helping our people remember their true purpose. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city, Olathi made her decision. Where do we start? Niabi smiled, a mix of relief and excitement in her expression. We need to gather allies, seek out the hidden places where the old knowledge is still preserved. But first, she hesitated, her eyes searching Olathi's face. There's someone you need to meet. Someone who knew your mother, who might have answers about your true heritage. Who? Olathi asked, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Her name is Awinita, Niabi replied. She lives in seclusion, in the mountains to the north. She was once a powerful shaman, but she turned her back on the pack politics years ago. If anyone can help us understand the true nature of your powers, and the real meaning of the prophecy, it's her. Olathi nodded, a sense of purpose filling the void left by her broken bond. Then that's where we'll go. But Niabi. She paused, her voice dropping to a near whisper. What if Kichi finds us? What if he tries to force the bond back into place? Niabi's expression grew grim. That's a risk we'll have to take. But remember, Olathi, you're stronger than you know. The power inside you, it's yours to shape now. No one can take that away from you. As they began to plan their journey, gathering what few supplies they would need, Olathi felt a shift in the air. The urban landscape outside her window seemed to fade away, replaced by fleeting visions of moonlit forests and ancient stone circles. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but for the first time in her life, Olathi felt truly free to choose her own destiny. Little did they know, miles away in the heart of the Packlands, Kichi stood before the council, his eyes burning with an unnatural fire. She will return, he growled, his voice distorted by barely contained rage. The prophecy will be fulfilled, no matter the cost. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the shifter world and redefine the balance between human, wolf, and the ancient magics that bound them all. The rugged terrain of the northern mountains loomed before Olathi and Niabi, a stark contrast to the urban landscape they'd left behind. 3 days of hard travel had brought them to the foot of an ancient forest, where the air thrummed with a palpable energy that set their wolf senses on edge. Are you sure this is the right place? Olathi asked, her eyes scanning the dense tree line. The tattoos on her arms seemed to pulse in response to their surroundings, creating intricate patterns that spoke of hidden pathways and ancient wards. Niabi nodded, her expression a mixture of reverence and apprehension. Awinita's sanctuary lies beyond these trees. The old stories say that only those with pure intentions can find the way. As they stepped into the shadow of the forest, the world around them seemed to shift. The sounds of the modern world faded away, replaced by an otherworldly silence broken only by the whisper of wind through leaves and the occasional call of an unseen bird. Hours passed as they navigated the twisting paths, guided by instinct and the faint pull of magic that seemed to tug at their very souls. Just as exhaustion began to set in, the trees parted to reveal a hidden valley nestled between towering peaks. At the center of the valley stood a modest cabin, its weathered wood seeming to grow organically from the surrounding landscape. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying with it the scent of herbs and old magic. Before they could approach, a voice rang out clear and commanding. "Who dares to enter the sanctuary of Awenita, keeper of the old ways?" Olathi and Niabi froze, their eyes searching for the source of the voice. From the shadows of the cabin emerged a woman, her age impossible to determine. Her long silver hair was adorned with feathers and beads, and her eyes held a wisdom that seemed to peer directly into their souls. "Speak, children of the moon," Awenita commanded, her gaze fixed on Olathe. "What brings you to this place of power?" Olathe stepped forward, her heart pounding. "I am Olathi, granddaughter of—" "I know who you are, child," Awenita interrupted, her expression softening slightly. "The question is, do you?" The words hit Olathi like a physical blow, stirring up the doubts and questions that had plagued her since discovering the truth about her past. That's why we're here," she managed to say. "I need to understand. About my powers, about the prophecy, about everything." Awenita studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Come then. There is much to discuss and the shadows grow long." As they followed the elder shaman into the cabin, Olathi couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed some invisible threshold. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning sage and other herbs she couldn't identify. Shelves lined the walls filled with ancient texts, jars of mysterious substances, and artifacts that seemed to hum with latent power. "Sit," Awenita instructed, gesturing to a circle of cushions on the floor. As they settled, she began to prepare a steaming brew in a large ornate bowl. "First, we must open your eyes to the truth that has been hidden from you." She handed each of them a cup of the fragrant liquid. "Drink. This will help you see beyond the veil of lies and half-truths that have clouded your vision." Olathi hesitated for a moment, exchanging a glance with Niabi, before raising the cup to her lips. The liquid was bitter and sweet at the same time, seeming to burn and soothe as it went down. Almost immediately, the world around her began to shift and blur. "Your mother was like you." Awenita's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "A child of two worlds, born with the power to bridge the gap between the physical and the spiritual." Images flashed before Olathi's eyes. A young woman with her eyes and smile, running through moonlit forests, her laughter echoing through the trees. But the joy in the vision quickly gave way to darkness. The council, in their arrogance, sought to harness this power, Awenita continued, her words painting vivid pictures in Olathi's mind. They believed they could create the perfect alpha, one who could unite all packs under a single rule. But they did not understand the true nature of the magic they were toying with. The scene shifted, showing a dimly lit chamber where robed figures surrounded a heavily pregnant woman, Olathi's mother. Energy crackled in the air, wild and uncontrolled. Olathi could feel her mother's fear, her desperation to protect the child growing within her. The ritual they attempted went horribly wrong. Awenita's voice was heavy with sorrow. The power they sought to control was too great, too primal. It shattered the bonds between pack members, twisting the very nature of what it means to be a shifter. Olathe saw her father now, his face contorted in agony as he fought against a darkness that seemed to be consuming him from within. Her mother's screams echoed through the vision, a sound of both pain and defiance. "In that moment of chaos, your mother made a choice," Awenita said softly. "She used every ounce of her power to protect you, to ensure that you would be born free from the taint of the council's ambition." The vision cleared, showing Olathi's mother cradling a newborn child, her eyes filled with a fierce love and determination. With trembling hands, she traced intricate patterns on the baby's skin, the very tattoos that Olathe now bore. "She imbued you with ancient protections," Awenita explained, "and with the potential to one day undo the damage that had been done. But the cost was her life, and that of your father." As the vision faded, Olathi found herself back in the cabin, tears streaming down her face. Niabi sat beside her, equally shaken by what she had seen. "The prophecy," Olathi managed to say, her voice hoarse with emotion. What does it really mean? Awanita's eyes were filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope as she replied. The prophecy speaks of a great unifier, yes, but not in the way the council interpreted it. It speaks of one who will heal the rift between the physical and spiritual worlds, who will remind our people of their true purpose as guardians of the balance. And they think that's me? Olathe asked, still struggling to process everything she had learned. You have the potential, Awanita nodded. But potential is not destiny. The choice of whether to embrace this path or not is yours alone. Niabi spoke up, her voice filled with urgency. But what about Kichi? The bond that was broken. He won't give up easily. Awanita's expression darkened. No, he will not. The ritual that went wrong the night you were conceived, it affected more than just your parents. It created a hunger in some, a desire for power that goes against the very nature of what we are. Kichi is a victim of this, though he does not realize it. Can he be saved? Olathe asked, surprised by the pang of sympathy she felt for her former mate. Perhaps, Awanita replied cautiously. But first, you must fully awaken the power within you. The gift your mother left you, it is more than just protection. It is a key to unlocking the ancient magics that have been lost to our people for generations. As if in response to her words, Olathe's tattoos began to glow faintly, the patterns shifting and changing before their eyes. How do I do that? Olathe asked, a mix of fear and determination in her voice. Awanita rose, moving to a locked chest in the corner of the room. There is a ritual, passed down through my line for centuries. It will open your eyes to the true nature of your power and help you connect with the spirits of those who came before. She returned with a small, intricately carved box. But I warn you, child, this path is not an easy one. You will face trials that will test not just your strength but your very identity. Are you prepared for that? Olathe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of generations resting on her shoulders. She thought of her parents, of the sacrifice they had made, of Kichi, lost in a darkness he didn't understand, of all the shifters out there, struggling with powers they couldn't control. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady and clear. Awanita nodded solemnly. Then we begin at moonrise. Niabi, you will need to stand guard. The energy this ritual will release, it may attract unwanted attention. As they began to prepare, gathering herbs and drawing complex symbols on the cabin floor, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the howls of distant wolves. Miles away, in the heart of pack territory, Kichi jerked awake, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He could feel it. A shift in the very fabric of reality. She's doing it, he growled, his voice distorted by barely contained rage. She's trying to undo everything we've worked for. Elder Sequoia watched from the shadows, his face a mask of concern. Perhaps it is time to let her go, Kichi. The cost of pursuing this path. Silence, Kichi roared, his form blurring between man and beast. I will not be denied what is rightfully mine. Gather the others. We hunt tonight. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountain valley, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the shifter world. In Awanita's cabin, Olathe prepared to face her destiny, unaware of the dark forces racing to stop her. The true meaning of the prophecy was about to be revealed, and with it, the fate of not just the packs, but the delicate balance between the human world and the realm of spirits hung in the balance. The moon rose over the mountain peaks, casting an ethereal glow across the hidden valley. Inside Awanita's cabin, the air crackled with tension and anticipation. Olathe stood at the center of an intricate pattern drawn on the floor in crushed herbs and shimmering powders, her heart pounding. In her chest, Awanita moved around her, lighting candles and murmuring ancient incantations in a language Olathe didn't recognize. The old shaman's eyes glowed with an inner light, her silver hair seeming to float on unseen currents of energy. Remember, Awanita said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, the power you seek has always been within you. This ritual will not grant you anything new. It will simply open your eyes to what has always been there. Niabi stood guard by the door, her senses on high alert. "I can feel something," she whispered. "It's like the whole forest is holding its breath." Olathe nodded, unable to find her voice. The tattoos on her skin had begun to glow faintly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She could feel the magic building around her, a pressure that seemed to press in from all sides. "Close your eyes," Awinita instructed, placing a hand on Olathe's forehead. "Breathe deeply and let your mind drift. Feel the connection to the earth beneath your feet, to the air in your lungs, to the blood in your veins." As Olathe followed the shaman's guidance, the world around her began to fade away. The sound of Awinita's chanting became distant, replaced by a low, thrumming pulse that seemed to resonate with something deep inside her. Suddenly, she was no longer in the cabin. Olathe found herself standing in a vast, primordial forest. The trees towered above her, their branches intertwining to create a living canopy that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick with the scent of loam and wild magic. "Welcome, daughter," a familiar voice called out. Olathe turned to see a woman standing nearby, her features a perfect blend of Olathe's own and someone she had only seen in faded photographs. "Mom?" Olathe's voice cracked with emotion. The woman smiled, her eyes filled with a love so intense it was almost painful to look at. "Yes, my darling. I've been waiting for this moment for so long." Olathe wanted to run to her, to throw her arms around the mother she had never known. But something held her back, an instinctive understanding that this was more than just a vision or a dream. "Where are we?" she asked, looking around at the mystical forest. "This is the spirit realm," her mother explained, gesturing to their surroundings. "The place where all things are connected, where past and present and future exist as one." As she spoke, the forest around them seemed to come alive. Shadows moved between the trees, wolves, bears, eagles, and creatures Olathe had no name for. She could feel their eyes upon her, curious and expectant. "The ritual," Olathe said, remembering why she was here. "I need to understand my power, to learn how to control it." Her mother's expression grew serious. "Control is not the goal, Olathe. Understanding, yes. Acceptance, absolutely. But true power, the kind that can heal the rift between worlds, comes from harmony, not control." As if to illustrate her point, the woman held out her hand. Energy swirled around her fingers, coalescing into a glowing orb. Within it, Olathe could see flashes of the past, her parents' love, their fear, the ritual that had gone so horribly wrong. "The council sought to harness the power of the spirit world," her mother continued, her voice tinged with sadness. "They believed they could create the perfect alpha, one who could bridge the gap between human and wolf. But in their arrogance, they unleashed forces they couldn't comprehend." The orb's images shifted, showing the aftermath of that fateful night. Olathe saw pack members turned against each other, their bonds twisted and corrupted. She saw Kichi as a young boy, his eyes already burning with an unnatural hunger. "The prophecy they clung to," Olathe began, understanding dawning. "It was never about creating a supreme ruler, was it?" Her mother shook her head. "No. The true prophecy speaks of a healer, one who can mend the bonds between pack members, between shifters and humans, between the physical world and the spirit realm. And that's me?" Olathe asked, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "It could be," her mother replied, "but only if you choose it. The power is yours, Olathe, but so is the choice of how to use it." Before Olathe could respond, a howl echoed through the spirit forest, a sound filled with rage and pain that made the very air around them shudder. "Kichi," Olathe whispered, recognizing the voice even in this altered form. Her mother's expression grew grim. "He comes for you, driven by the twisted remnants of your bond and the corruption that has taken root in his soul. You must be prepared to face him, Olathe, not just with power but with compassion." "Compassion?" Olathe asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "After everything he's done?" "Especially after everything he's done," her mother insisted. "Remember, he is as much a victim of the council's machinations as anyone. The darkness that drives him, It can be healed, but only if you're willing to see beyond your own pain and fear. The forest around them began to shimmer and fade, the connection to the spirit realm weakening. Olathi felt a pull, drawing her back to the physical world. "Wait!" she cried out, reaching for her mother. "There's so much more I need to know." Her mother smiled, love and pride shining in her eyes. "Trust yourself, Olathi. The knowledge you seek is already within you. Let it flow through you, guide you. And remember, you are never truly alone." With those words, the spirit forest dissolved into mist. Olathi gasped, her eyes flying open as she found herself back in Awenita's cabin. The candles had burned low, and the first light of dawn was creeping through the windows. "Welcome back," Awenita said softly, helping Olathi to her feet. "You were in the trance for hours." Olathi swayed slightly, her mind reeling from the experience. She looked down at her arms, marveling at the way her tattoos now seemed to shift and move of their own accord, responding to her thoughts and emotions. I saw my mother," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She showed me so much, but I still have so many questions." Awenita nodded, understanding. "The spirit journey is not meant to provide all the answers, child. It is a beginning, an awakening to possibilities. What you do with that knowledge, how you interpret and apply it, that is the true test." Before Olathi could respond, Niabi burst through the door, her eyes wide with alarm. "We have company," she announced, her voice tight with tension. "I can smell them, Kitchi and at least a dozen others. They're coming up the mountain." Olathi's heart raced, the memory of Kitchi's anguished howl in the spirit realm still fresh in her mind. She could feel him now, a dark presence pushing against the edges of her consciousness. "What do we do?" she asked, looking between Awenita and Niabi. The old shaman's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. "We stand our ground," she declared. "This cabin, this valley, they are protected by ancient wards. Kitchi and his followers cannot simply force their way in." "But they'll try," Niabi warned. "You didn't see him in the days after the bond broke, Olathi. He's changed. The man we knew, he's buried beneath layers of rage and obsession." Olathi closed her eyes, reaching out with her newfound senses. She could feel the wards Awenita spoke of, lines of power crisscrossing the valley, anchored to standing stones and ancient trees. But she could also feel the pressure building against them, fueled by Kitchi's determination and the corrupted power he now wielded. "We need to confront him," Olathi said, opening her eyes with new resolve. "Not to fight, at least not in the way he expects. My mother showed me. There might be a way to heal him, to heal all of them." Awenita raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The old magics of purification and renewal? It's been generations since anyone attempted such a thing." Olathi nodded. "I don't fully understand it yet, but I know it's possible. The power that was meant to create the perfect alpha, it was never about dominance or control. It was about harmony, about bringing balance back to our people." "A noble goal," Niabi said, her voice tinged with doubt. "But Kitchi isn't going to stand still and let you work some spirit magic on him. He's coming here to claim you, to force the bond back into place." "Then we need to be smart about this," Olathi replied, her mind racing. "Awenita, you said the valley is protected. Can we use that? Create a neutral ground where we can meet without immediately resorting to violence?" The old shaman considered for a moment before nodding slowly. "There is a place, at the heart of the valley, an ancient stone circle where the veils between worlds are thin. If we can lure Kitchi there, the ambient magic might be enough to amplify your powers, give you a chance to reach him before his rage takes over." "It's risky," Niabi warned. "If it doesn't work, we'll be trapped with no easy escape." Olathi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice before her. She thought of her mother's words, of the love and trust she had seen in her eyes. "We have to try," she said finally. "For Kitchi, for the pack, for all of us. This cycle of violence and mistrust, it has to end somewhere." Awenita nodded approvingly. Spoken like a true leader, she said. Very well. I will prepare the circle. Niabi, you will need to run interference, slow Kichi and his followers down without engaging directly. Olathe, you must center yourself, find the calm at the core of your being. The magic you will attempt requires absolute focus. As they moved to put their plan into action, Olathe paused at the cabin's threshold. She could feel Kichi's presence, growing stronger, the maelstrom of his emotions battering against her mental defenses. Beneath the anger and the hunger for power, she caught glimpses of the man she had once loved, lost, afraid, desperately seeking something to fill the void left by their broken bond. I'm coming, Kichi, she whispered, her words carried on the wind. Not as your mate, not as your enemy, but as someone who sees your pain. Let me help you. Let me help us all. With that, she stepped out into the dawn-lit valley, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fate of not just Kichi, but of all shifters, hung in the balance. As Olathe made her way towards the ancient stone circle, she felt the power within her surge, responding to her determination and newfound purpose. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either heal the deep wounds of the past or plunge their world into darkness. And Olathe, daughter of sacrifice and prophecy, stood at the center of it all, ready to embrace her destiny. The ancient stone circle stood silent and imposing in the heart of the valley, its weathered monoliths reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. As Olathe approached, she could feel the power thrumming through the earth, resonating with the newfound energy coursing through her veins. Awenita was already there, moving between the stones with practiced ease, laying down intricate patterns of herbs and crystals. The old shaman's eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light as she worked, her lips moving in silent incantation. The circle is nearly ready, Awenita said as Olathe drew near. But remember, child, this place will amplify all energies, both light and dark. Your intentions must remain pure, your will unshakable. Olathe nodded, her throat tight with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She could feel Kichi's presence growing stronger with each passing moment, a storm of rage and desperation pushing against the edges of her consciousness. What if I can't reach him? She asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at her since they'd formulated their plan. What if the darkness has taken too strong a hold? Awenita paused in her preparations, fixing Olathe with a penetrating gaze. There is always hope, as long as there is love. The bond you shared with Kichi, it may be broken, but its echoes remain. Use that connection. Remind him of who he was, of who he can be again. Before Olathe could respond, a howl split the air, closer now, filled with a primal hunger that made her skin prickle. Niabi burst from the tree line, her clothes torn and her breath coming in ragged gasps. They're here, she panted, her eyes wide with urgency. I managed to lead some of them astray, but Kichi, he's coming straight for us, and he's not alone. As if summoned by her words, dark shapes began to emerge from the forest. Kichi strode at their head, his massive form rippling with barely contained power. His eyes, once a warm amber, now burned with an unnatural crimson fire. Behind him, a handful of pack members followed, their expressions a mixture of fear, confusion, and grim determination. Olathe! Kichi's voice boomed across the clearing, a growl underlying every word. Did you think you could hide from me? That you could deny our destiny? Olathe stepped forward, placing herself between Kichi and the stone circle. She could feel the magic building around her, responding to her will. This isn't our destiny, Kichi, she called out, infusing her voice with all the certainty she could muster. What was done to us, what was done to the pack, it was never meant to be this way. Kichi's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. And what would you know of it? You who turned your back on everything we were promised? His gaze swept over Awenita and the prepared circle, his lips curling in a snarl. More spirit tricks? Do you think your grandmother's pet shaman can protect Awao? You from me? I'm not looking for protection, Olathe replied, taking another step forward. She could see the others tensing, ready for a fight, but she kept her focus on Kichi. I'm offering healing. For you. For all of us. For a moment, something flickered. In Kitchi's eyes, a flash of the man he had once been, but it was quickly subsumed by the darkness that had taken root in his soul. Healing, he spat. The only healing I need is to reclaim what's mine, to fulfill the prophecy and take my rightful place as the Supreme Alpha. As he spoke, the air around him seemed to darken, shadows writhing and twisting unnaturally. The pack members behind him shifted uneasily, some taking involuntary steps back. Olathi felt a surge of pity. This was what the council's meddling had wrought. A man consumed by a hunger he didn't understand, driven by a twisted interpretation of a prophecy that was never meant for domination. "Kitchi, please," she said, her voice softer now. "Look at what this obsession is doing to you, to the pack. This isn't who you are. Remember when we first met? How you talked about wanting to protect our people, to preserve our traditions?" For a heartbeat, Kitchi's aggressive stance faltered. A flicker of confusion passed across his face, as if he were trying to recall a long-forgotten memory. But then his features hardened once more. "Enough talk," he growled. "You will come with me, willingly or not. The bond will be restored, and I will claim the power that is rightfully mine." He lunged forward, his form blurring as he began to shift. But Olathi was ready. As Kitchi crossed the boundary of the stone circle, she reached deep within herself, drawing on the power that had awakened during her spirit journey. "Now, Awenita!" she cried. The old shaman slammed her staff into the ground, and the circle blazed to life. Lines of ethereal energy connected the standing stones, creating a shimmering barrier that separated Olathi and Kitchi from the others. Inside the circle, the air grew thick with magic. Olathi could see strands of energy connecting her to Kitchi, the remnants of their broken bond made visible by the amplifying power of this sacred space. Kitchi snarled, momentarily taken aback by the sudden shift in their surroundings. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice distorted as he fought against his partial transformation. "This is the truth, Kitchi," Olathi replied, her own voice resonating with newfound power. "This is who we really are beneath the lies and the manipulation." She reached out, not with her hands but with her spirit, grasping the glowing strands that connected them. Kitchi gasped, his eyes widening as he felt the touch of her consciousness against his own. In that moment of connection, Olathi saw everything: the pain of their broken bond, the fear that drove Kitchi's obsession, the whispers of the corrupted council members who had fed his darkest impulses. But beneath it all, she saw the core of who Kitchi truly was: the protector, the leader, the man she had once loved. "Remember," she whispered, pushing past his mental defenses. "Remember who you are." Images flowed between them. Moonlit, runs through the forest, laughter shared around pack bonfires, quiet moments of tenderness and understanding. But also, darker memories. The night of the failed ritual, the slow poison of ambition and resentment that had eaten away at their relationship. Kitchi struggled against the onslaught of memories and emotions, his form shifting erratically between human and wolf. "No!" he roared, but his voice held more desperation than anger now. "You can't! I won't let you!" Outside the circle, the pack members watched in awe and confusion. Niabi stood ready, prepared to intervene if things went wrong, while Awenita maintained her focus on the barrier, sweat beading on her brow from the effort of containing the powerful energies at play. "Fight it, Kitchi," Olathi urged, her voice strained as she poured more of herself into the connection. "Fight the darkness. It isn't you. It was never meant to be you." For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Kitchi's fate hung in the balance. Olathi could feel him teetering on the edge, the corrupted power that had driven him for so long battling against the truth she was showing him. And then, with a howl that shook the very stones around them, something within Kitchi broke. The unnatural fire in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by a look of utter anguish and confusion. "Olathi," he whispered, his voice suddenly small and vulnerable. What have I done?" The change was immediate and profound. The shadows that had clung to Kichi dissipated, revealing the man beneath, battered, exhausted, but free from the dark influence that had twisted him for so long. Olathe felt her knees give out, the strain of the healing taking its toll. But before she could fall, strong arms caught her. She looked up to see Kichi holding her, his eyes clear for the first time in months, filled with a mixture of sorrow and dawning understanding. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. I couldn't see." "It's okay," Olathe replied, her own eyes brimming with tears of relief and exhaustion. "It wasn't your fault. We were all pawns in a game we didn't understand." As the barrier around the circle faded, Awenita approached, her expression a mixture of awe and cautious hope. "The healing has begun," she announced, her voice carrying to all present. "But this is only the first step. The corruption that has plagued our people runs deep." The pack members who had accompanied Kichi now stood uncertain, looking between, their former alpha and Olathe with a mixture of fear and longing. They could sense the change that had occurred, the shift in the very fabric of their reality. Niabi stepped forward, her voice filled with quiet determination. "What happens now?" she asked, looking from Olathe to Kichi to Awenita. Olathe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The power that flowed through her now was not the corrupted force the council had sought to create, but something older, purer, a connection to the true spirit of what it meant to be a shifter. "Now," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "we heal. Not just Kichi, not just our pack, but all of our people." The prophecy was never about creating a supreme alpha or dominating others. It was about restoring balance, about remembering who we truly are. Kichi nodded, his expression solemn. "I have much to atone for," he said, looking at the pack members who had followed him. "We all do. The council's influence, it runs deeper than we realized. Then we face it together," Olathe declared, reaching out to take Kichi's hand, not as mates, not as alpha and subordinate, but as equals united in a common purpose. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its light over the ancient stone circle, a sense of possibility filled the air. The path ahead would not be easy. There were still those who clung to the old ways, who would resist the change that was coming. But in that moment, standing amidst the remnants of ancient magic and newfound hope, Olathe knew that they had taken the first crucial step towards always healing the wounds of the past. "Come," she said, addressing all present. "We have work to do." As they made their way back towards Awenita's cabin, Olathe felt a presence at the edge of her consciousness, a warm, loving touch that reminded her of her mother's embrace in the spirit realm. She smiled, knowing that she carried the wisdom and strength of generations within her. The true journey was just beginning, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Olathe felt truly hopeful about the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a pack, as a people, united in their determination to reclaim their true heritage and forge a new path forward. The days following the confrontation at the stone circle were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Olathe, Kichi, and their small group of allies found themselves at the center of a storm that threatened to reshape the very foundations of shifter society. Word spread quickly through the packlands of what had transpired in Awenita's hidden valley. Some dismissed it as rumor or exaggeration, but many more felt the change in the air, a shift in the currents of power that had governed their world for generations. It was on a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted on the breeze, that Olathe stood before the assembled members of her former pack. The gathering place was a natural amphitheater, carved into the side of a hill over centuries of use. Faces both familiar and strange looked up at her, their expressions a mixture of hope, skepticism, and barely concealed fear. Kichi stood slightly behind her, his presence a silent support. He had insisted on facing the pack alongside her, ready to bear the weight of his actions and the responsibility for what came next. Awenita and Niabi flanked them, representing the bridge between old wisdom and new possibilities. Olathe took a deep breath, feeling the power within her respond to the charged atmosphere. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every ear, imbued with a quiet authority that came not from dominance, but from truth. "For too long, we have lived in the shadow of lies," she began, her words causing a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. "The council's manipulation, the twisted interpretation of ancient prophecies, it has led us down a dark path, one that threatens the very essence of who we are as shifters." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled pack members. Some met her eyes with defiance, others with dawning understanding. "But that path is not set in stone," Olathe continued, her voice growing stronger. "What happened in Awanita's Valley was not just about healing one individual. It was a reminder of our true heritage, of the balance we were meant to maintain between the physical world and the spirit realm." As she spoke, Olathe could feel the energy around her shifting. The tattoos on her skin seemed to come alive, patterns flowing and changing in response to the power building in the air. Several pack members gasped, pointing and whispering as they noticed the phenomenon. "I stand before you not as an alpha seeking to rule," Olathe declared, "but as a catalyst for change, the prophecy that has been used to justify so much pain and division. It was never about creating a supreme leader. It was about healing the rifts that have torn our people apart, about reconnecting with the ancient magics that are our birthright." A voice called out from the crowd, angry and challenging. "And we're just supposed to take your word for it, after everything that's happened?" Olathe recognized the speaker, Dakota, one of the council's most ardent supporters. His eyes blazed with a familiar fire, one that spoke of the same corruption that had nearly destroyed Kitchi. "No," Olathe replied calmly. "I don't ask for blind faith. I offer proof." With that, she closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, drawing on the power she had awakened in the stone circle. The air around her began to shimmer, and suddenly, the entire gathering place was filled with ghostly images, visions of the past, of the spirit realm, of the true history of their people. Pack members watched in awe as scenes played out before them, the original shifters, in harmony with nature and the spirit world, the gradual corruption of their practices as fear and hunger for power took hold, the council's misguided attempts to create the perfect alpha through dark rituals and forced bonds. But more than just history, Olathe showed them possibility, glimpses of a future where shifters once again walked in balance between worlds, where their gifts were used to protect and nurture rather than to dominate and control. As the visions faded, a hush fell over the gathering. Olathe opened her eyes, feeling drained but empowered. The faces looking back at her now held a new light, one of awakening, of hope, and yes, for some, of fear at the magnitude of change that lay ahead. Kitchi stepped forward then, his voice rough with emotion. "I stand as living proof of both the darkness we have fallen into and the potential for redemption," he said. "What Olathe offers is not an easy path. It will require us to confront painful truths, to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about our place in the world. But it is a path that leads to healing, to reclaiming our true selves." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mixture of agreement and uncertainty. Olathe could sense the conflicting emotions, the longing for something better warring with the comfort of the familiar, even if that familiarity was rooted in pain and division. Awanita moved to stand beside Olathe, her ancient eyes scanning the gathering. "Change is never easy," the old shaman intoned, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "But it is necessary. The balance must be restored, not just for our sake, but for the sake of all living things. We were meant to be guardians, bridges between realms. It is time we remembered that sacred duty." As the words settled over the assembly, Olathe felt a shift in the energy of the pack. It wasn't universal. She could still sense pockets of resistance, of fear and anger. But there was also a growing current of something else, a tentative hope, a willingness to consider a different way forward. Niabi, who had been quietly observing, now spoke up. "This isn't about abandoning everything we are," she said, her clear voice ringing out. "It's about reclaiming the best parts of our heritage while leaving behind the corrupted practices that have caused so much harm. We can be strong without being cruel, united without being uniform. A moment of silence followed her words, broken by a young voice from the back of the crowd. But what about the other packs? The council? They won't just accept this change. Olathe nodded, acknowledging the valid concern. You're right, she said. This is only the beginning. The road ahead will be challenging. There will be those who resist, who cling to the old ways out of fear or a desire for power. But we are not alone. She gestured to Awenita. There are others like Awenita, keepers of the old wisdom who have been waiting for this moment. And there are shifters in other packs, other territories, who have felt the wrongness in our current path. Together, we can build a network of support, of education, of healing. As she spoke, Olathe could feel the power within her reaching out, connecting with the latent abilities of those gathered. It wasn't control or domination. It was an awakening, a gentle reminder of the potential that lay dormant in each of them. I'm not asking you to follow me blindly, Olathe continued, her voice filled with quiet conviction. I'm asking you to look within yourselves, to reconnect with the true spirit of what it means to be a shifter. The choice to embrace this change, to be part of this healing. It must come from each of you. Kitchi stepped forward once more, his eyes meeting those of his former packmates. I know I have much to atone for, he said, his voice heavy with regret, but also determination. My actions, driven by the council's corruption and my own fears, have caused deep wounds. I stand ready to face the consequences, to do whatever is necessary to make things right. His words seemed to break a dam of emotion in the gathering. Suddenly, pack members were speaking up, sharing their own experiences of doubt and unease with the old ways. Others voiced their fears about change, about losing their identity or their place in the hierarchy. Olathe listened to it all, her heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow for the pain they had endured and hope for the healing that was now possible. As the discussions continued, sometimes heated but always honest, she felt the first true stirrings of community, not based on forced bonds or rigid hierarchy, but on shared experience and a collective desire for something better. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gathering place, Olathe raised her hand for attention. The conversations quieted, all eyes turning to her once more. This is not a decision to be made lightly or quickly, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Take time to reflect, to discuss among yourselves. In 3 days we will gather again. Those who wish to be part of this new path, to join in the work of healing and reconnecting with our true heritage, you will be welcome. Those who need more time, or who choose to follow a different way, you will not be forced or coerced. She paused, making eye contact with as many pack members as she could. But know this, the change has already begun. The old barriers are weakening. The spirit realm calls to us, reminding us of our responsibilities and our potential. We can either embrace this awakening or be left behind by it. As the gathering dispersed, the air was thick with emotion and possibility. Olathe could feel the threads of connection between pack members shifting, realigning based on genuine affinity rather than imposed hierarchy. Kitchi approached her, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope. Do you think it will be enough? He asked softly. There's so much damage to undo, so much mistrust to overcome. Olathe reached out, taking his hand in a gesture of solidarity. It's a start, she replied. And sometimes, that's all we need. A chance to begin again, to make different choices. As they made their way back to Awenita's cabin, where they had established a temporary base of operations, Olathe felt a familiar presence brush against her consciousness, the spirit of her mother, a warm and comforting touch. You've taken the first step, the ghostly voice whispered. The path ahead will not be easy, but you do not walk it alone. Remember, the true strength of a pack lies not in dominance, but in harmony. Olathe smiled, drawing strength from the connection. Whatever challenges lay ahead, resistance from other packs, the machinations of council loyalists, the difficult work of undoing generations of harmful practices, she felt ready to face them. As night fell over the packlands, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Change was coming, as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. And in that change lay the seeds of healing, of reconnection, of a future where the boundaries between human, wolf, and spirit might once again blur, in the most beautiful of ways. The 3 days following the pack gathering passed in a whirlwind of activity and tension. Olathe, Kitchi, and their growing circle of allies found themselves at the center of intense discussions, impromptu healing sessions, and no small amount of conflict as the reality of their proposed changes began to sink in. On the morning of the 3rd day, as mist clung to the valleys and the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Olathe stood at the edge of Awanita's property. Her enhanced senses, more attuned than ever to the currents of energy around her, picked up the approach of someone long before they came into view. "I wondered when you'd show up," she said softly, as Elder Sequoia emerged from the tree line. The old wolf looked haggard, his usually immaculate robes disheveled, and his eyes haunted. "You've started something that cannot be easily stopped," Sequoia said, his voice a mixture of accusation and grudging respect. "The council is in an uproar. Some are calling for immediate action against you and your followers." Olathe nodded, unsurprised. "And what do you think, Elder? You've seen the truth of what the council's manipulations have wrought. You were there the night everything went wrong with my parents." Sequoia flinched at the mention of that fateful night. "We thought we were doing what was best for our people," he said, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "The prophecy was never meant to be interpreted the way you did," Olathe interrupted gently. "You know that now, don't you? You felt the shift in the energies, the awakening of old magics that have lain dormant for generations." The elder was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the misty valley below. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with the weight of long-buried truths. "Your mother, she tried to warn us. The night of the ritual, before everything went wrong, she begged us to stop, said we were meddling with forces beyond our understanding." Olathe felt a pang in her heart at the mention of her mother. "And now?" she asked, turning to face Sequoia fully. The old wolf met her eyes, and in that moment, Olathe saw the facade of the stern elder crumble away, revealing a man grappling with the consequences of centuries of misguided actions. "Now," Sequoia said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think it's time I started listening." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the gathering place, Olathe once again stood before the assembled pack. This time, however, the crowd was larger. Word had spread beyond their immediate territory, drawing curious and concerned shifters from neighboring packs. Kitchi stood at her side, his presence a silent testament to the possibility of change and redemption. Awanita and Niabi flanked them, representing the bridge between old wisdom and new possibilities. And to the surprise of many, Elder Sequoia had taken a place among their group, his decision to stand with Olathe sending shockwaves through the gathering. "3 days ago," Olathe began, her voice carrying clearly to every ear, "I asked you to reflect, to look within yourselves and consider the path we have been on. Today, I stand before you not to demand allegiance or to impose a new order, but to offer a choice." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled shifters. The energy in the air was palpable, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and a growing sense of possibility. "For too long, we have been bound by chains of our own making," Olathe continued. "Forced bonds, rigid hierarchies, the suppression of our true natures in the name of control and power. But that is not who we are meant to be." As she spoke, Olathe felt the power within her rising, responding to the charged atmosphere. The tattoos on her skin began to glow faintly, patterns shifting and flowing in a mesmerizing dance. The prophecy that has guided the Council's actions for generations was never about creating a supreme alpha or dominating others, she declared. It was a call to remember our true purpose, as guardians of the balance between worlds, as protectors of the wild places, as bridges between the physical and the spiritual. A murmur ran through the crowd at her words. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uneasily, the weight of generations of ingrained beliefs pressing down on them. Kitchi stepped forward then, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I stand before you as living proof of both the darkness we have fallen into and the potential for healing," he said. "The path Olathe offers is not an easy one. It requires us to confront painful truths, to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about our place in the world. But it is a path that leads to freedom, to reconnection with our true selves and with the magic that is our birthright." As he spoke, Olathe could feel the energy around Kitchi shifting. The last traces of the corruption that had once gripped him were fading, replaced by a steady, grounded power that spoke of balance and hard-won inner peace. Elder Sequoia stepped forward then, his presence causing a ripple of surprise through the gathering. "For centuries, the Council has claimed to act in the best interests of our people," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "But we were wrong. In our fear, in our hunger for control, we twisted the ancient prophecies and lost sight of what it truly means to be shifters." The old wolf's admission seemed to break a dam of emotion in the crowd. Suddenly, voices were rising, some in anger, some in relief, all charged with the catharsis of long-buried truths finally seeing the light of day. Olathe raised her hand, and a hush fell over the gathering. The power that flowed through her now was not the corrupted force the Council had sought to create, but something older, purer, a connection to the true spirit of what it meant to be a shifter. "I do not stand before you claiming to have all the answers," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The path ahead will be challenging. There will be those who resist, who cling to the old ways out of fear or a desire for power. But we are not alone in this journey." As if in response to her words, a stirring began at the edges of the gathering. Shifters who had been watching from the shadows began to step forward, representatives from other packs, lone wolves who had long sensed that something was wrong with the current order. Among them, Olathe recognized faces she had seen only in visions, keepers of old knowledge, shamans and healers who had gone into hiding to preserve the true ways of their people. They moved to stand with Awenita, forming a living link between past and future. "The choice before us is not an easy one," Olathe continued, her voice gaining strength. "To embrace this change means to let go of the certainties we have clung, to open ourselves to new possibilities and yes, to new risks. But it also means reclaiming our heritage, reconnecting with the magic that flows through our veins and the responsibility we bear as guardians of the wild." As she spoke, Olathe felt her consciousness expanding, touching the minds and hearts of those gathered. It wasn't control or coercion. It was an invitation, a gentle awakening of long-dormant potential. Suddenly, the air was filled with shimmering lights, spirit essences drawn by the power of the moment. They danced around the gathering, their presence a tangible reminder of the world beyond the physical that shifters were meant to bridge. Gasps of awe and wonder rippled through the crowd. Many of the younger pack members had never seen such a manifestation, their connection to the spirit realm having been suppressed by generations of misguided teachings. "This is who we are," Olathe said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "Not rulers, not soldiers, but guardians and bridges. The power we hold is not meant for domination, but for harmony, with nature, with the spirit world, and with ourselves." As the spirit light swirled around them, Olathe could feel the energy of the gathering shifting. The rigid lines of pack hierarchy were blurring, replaced by new connections based on genuine affinity and shared purpose. "I ask you now," she continued, "not to follow me, but to join me, to be part of this awakening, this return to our true selves. The path will not be easy. There will be challenges, conflicts, moments of doubt. But together we can forge a new way forward." A hush fell over the gathering as her words sank in. Then, slowly at first but with growing momentum, shifters began to step forward. Some moved with certainty, others with hesitation, but all with a sense of choice, perhaps the first real choice many of them had made in generations. Olathe watched with a mixture of joy and solemnity as groups began to form, those ready to embrace the new path, those who needed more time to consider, and yes, those who turned away, unwilling or unable to let go of the old ways. As the sun reached its zenith, casting away the last of the morning mist, Olathe felt a familiar presence brush against her consciousness, the spirit of her mother, a warm and approving touch. "You have opened the door," the ghostly voice whispered. "Now the real work begins." Olathe nodded, understanding the truth of those words. This gathering, this moment of choice, was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, resistance from other packs, the machinations of those who clung to power, the difficult work of undoing generations of harmful practices. But as she looked out at the faces of those who had chosen to stand with her, Kitchi, his eyes clear and determined. Niabi, her expression fierce and proud. Awinita and the other keepers of old knowledge, their presence a living connection to their people's true heritage, and the many shifters, young and old, who had taken this first step towards reclaiming their birthright. Olathe felt a surge of hope. "We have much work ahead of us," she said, addressing those who had stepped forward. "But we do not walk this path alone. Together, we will relearn the old ways, rediscover the magic that is our birthright, and forge new connections. Not just among ourselves, but with the human world and the spirit realm." As the gathering began to disperse, the air thick with emotion and possibility, Olathe felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But it was a weight she was ready to bear. Not alone, but supported by a growing community, united in purpose. The first step had been taken. The ripples of change were spreading, growing into waves that would reshape the very foundations of shifter society. And in that moment, standing at the threshold of a new era, Olathe knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a pack, as a people, united in their determination to reclaim their true heritage and forge a new path forward. As the weeks passed, the changes initiated by Olathe and her allies began to take root. The packlands, once rigidly divided by hierarchies and forced allegiances, were transforming. Small groups formed organically, drawn together by shared interests and natural affinities rather than imposed structures. Olathe found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Each day brought new challenges, new discoveries, and no small amount of conflict as they navigated the complex process of undoing generations of ingrained behaviors and beliefs. On a crisp autumn morning, Olathe stood atop a hill overlooking the valley that had become their base of operations. Tents and temporary structures dotted the landscape, housing shifters from various packs who had come to learn, to heal, and to be part of this unprecedented awakening. Kitchi approached, his footsteps nearly silent on the frost-covered grass. "The scouts have returned," he said, his voice low and tinged with concern. "The news isn't good." Olathe nodded, having sensed the undercurrent of tension in the air. "Tell me." "The council is mobilizing," Kitchi reported. "They're gathering allies from the more conservative packs, spreading rumors about us, calling us traitors, saying we're destroying shifter culture." A flicker of anger passed through Olathe, quickly replaced by a deep sadness. "They're afraid," she said softly. "Change is never easy, especially for those who have held power for so long." Kitchi's expression hardened. "Fear can make people dangerous. We need to be prepared." Before Olathe could respond, Niabi came rushing up the hill, her eyes wide with urgency. "You need to see this," she said, gesturing for them to follow. They made their way to the central gathering area, where a crowd had formed around a newcomer. As they approached, Olathe recognized the bedraggled figure. It was Dakota, one of the council's most ardent supporters who had challenged her at the first gathering. Dakota's clothes were torn, and he bore the marks of a recent fight. But it was the look in his eyes that caught Olathe's attention, a mixture of fear, desperation, and dawning realization. "Tell them what you told me," Niabi urged gently. Dakota took a shaky breath, his gaze darting nervously around the assembled crowd before settling on Olathe. "They're coming," he said, his voice hoarse. "The council, they've done something terrible." A murmur ran through the gathering. Olathe stepped forward, her presence calming the rising tension. "What have they done, Dakota?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "They found old texts," Dakota said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Ancient rituals, dark magic. They're trying to force a mass bonding to bring all the packs under their direct control. But it's not natural, it's twisting people. Changing them." A chill ran down Olathi's spine as she processed his words. She could feel the truth, of them resonating with the power inside her, setting off warnings in her newly awakened senses. "How did you escape?" Kitchi asked, his tone suspicious. Dakota's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't. Not really. I can feel it, trying to take hold." He looked at Olathi pleadingly. "I remembered what you showed us about our true nature. I fought it, but I don't know how long I can hold out. Please, help me." Without hesitation, Olathi stepped forward, placing her hand on Dakota's forehead. The moment they made contact, she could feel it, a dark, oily presence trying to worm its way into Dakota's very essence. Closing her eyes, Olathi reached deep within herself, drawing on the pure, wild magic that was her birthright. She poured healing energy into Dakota, not fighting against the darkness directly but rather strengthening his own inner light, his true nature as a shifter. The gathered crowd watched in awe as Olathi's tattoos began to glow, patterns of light spreading from her hand to envelop Dakota. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the two stood frozen in a tableau of healing and transformation. Then with a sound like shattering glass, the dark presence broke. Dakota gasped, his eyes flying open, now clear and free from the haunted look they had held before. "It's gone," he whispered, looking at his hands in wonder. "I can think clearly for the first time in I don't know how long." As Olathi stepped back, steadied by Kitchi's supportive hand, the implications of what had just occurred began to sink in. This was no longer just about changing old ways or rediscovering lost traditions. They were facing a direct and imminent threat, one that struck at the very heart of what it meant to be a shifter. "We need to call a council," Olathi said, her voice carrying across the now silent gathering. "Everyone. All the pack leaders who have joined us, the keepers of old knowledge, anyone who can help us understand what we're up against." As the crowd dispersed to spread the word and make preparations, Olathi turned to Kitchi and Niabi. "We need more information. Dakota's testimony is crucial, but we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Niabi nodded, her expression grim. "I'll reach out to my contacts in the other packs. There must be others who have sensed something wrong, who might be willing to share what they know." "I'll work with Awinita," Kitchi offered. "If the council is delving into forbidden magics, we need to understand what they might be capable of, and how to counter it." Olathi agreed, feeling the weight of leadership settling more firmly on her shoulders. As Kitchi and Niabi left, to begin their tasks, she found herself alone, looking out over the bustling encampment. In just a few short weeks, they had made so much progress. Shifters were rediscovering their connection to the spirit world, learning to use their gifts in harmony with nature rather than in pursuit of power. Old wounds were beginning to heal, and new bonds, genuine, freely chosen bonds, were forming. But now, all of that was threatened. The council's desperate grasp for control could undo everything they had worked for, and worse, it could corrupt the very essence of what it meant to be a shifter. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Olathi felt a familiar presence brush against her consciousness. The spirit of her mother, a comforting touch in the face of the gathering storm. "You are not alone in this fight," her mother's voice whispered. "Remember, the strength of a true pack lies, not in forced obedience but in unity born of shared purpose and mutual respect." Olathi nodded, drawing strength from the connection. She knew the challenges ahead would test them all, but she also knew that they had already come so far. The awakening they had started couldn't be undone, not completely. Even if the council succeeded in their dark ritual, the seeds of change had been planted. As night fell, the encampment came alive with activity. Fires were lit, casting flickering shadows as shifters gathered in small groups, their voices a low murmur of concern and determination. Olathe moved among them, offering words of encouragement, listening to fears and suggestions. Her presence, a steady anchor in the face of uncertainty. In Awenita's tent, a different kind of preparation was underway. The old shaman, surrounded by ancient texts and artifacts, worked tirelessly to unravel the nature of the magic the council was attempting to wield. Kichi sat with her, his brow furrowed in concentration as he pored over scrolls and symbols. "This is old magic," Awenita muttered, her gnarled fingers tracing lines of text. "Dangerous. It seeks to bypass the natural bonds between shifters and impose an artificial hierarchy. But the cost?" "What cost?" Kichi asked, looking up from his own research. Awenita's eyes were grave as she met his gaze. "To force such a bonding goes against the very nature of what we are. It would require a sacrifice, a tearing of the veil between worlds. The consequences could be catastrophic, not just for shifters, but for the balance of nature itself." Kichi felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered the darkness that had once consumed him, the hunger for power that had nearly destroyed everything he cared about. To think of that corruption spreading on a massive scale. "We have to stop them," he said, his voice low and intense. Awenita nodded slowly. "Yes, but it will not be easy. This magic, once set in motion, will have a momentum of its own. It will require a counter-ritual of equal power, one that reaffirms our true nature and strengthens the genuine bonds between shifters and the natural world." As they continued, their research seeking a way to combat the looming threat, Niabi was engaged in a different kind of battle. Seated cross-legged in a small clearing, her eyes closed in deep concentration, she reached out with her mind, seeking contacts in distant packs. The news she gathered was grim. Reports came in of shifters acting strangely, of pack bonds fraying and reforming in unnatural ways. Some spoke of dark dreams, of feeling pulled towards a central point of power. But there were glimmers of hope, too, whispers of resistance, of small groups going into hiding to escape the council's influence. As the night wore on, Olathe found herself standing once again on the hilltop, looking out over the now quiet encampment. The enormity of what they faced pressed down on her, but she refused to give in to despair. They had come too far, awakened, too much, to turn back now. Whatever the council was planning, whatever dark forces they had unleashed, Olathe knew that the true strength of shifters lay not in domination or control, but in their connection to each other and to the natural world. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Olathe made a decision. They would not wait for the council to make its move. They would take the fight to them, armed not with weapons of war, but with the truth of who they were meant to be. "Gather everyone," she told Kichi as he joined her on the hilltop. "It's time we made our stand." Kichi nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we face it together." Olathe smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for his unwavering support. As Kichi left to spread the word, she turned her gaze to the horizon, where storm clouds were gathering. The battle for the soul of shifterkind was about to begin. But Olathe knew that they had already won a crucial victory. They had remembered who they truly were. And in that remembering lay the seed of their ultimate triumph, no matter what. Challenges lay ahead. The journey to the council's stronghold was a tense affair. Olathe led a group of 200 shifters, a diverse mix of pack members who had embraced the new way, keepers of old knowledge like Awenita, and even a handful of humans who had long been allies to the shifter world. They moved swiftly through forests and over hills, their passage marked by an eerie silence as wildlife sensed the gravity of their purpose. As they neared their destination, the very air seemed to thicken with malevolent energy. Olathe could feel it pressing against her mental shields, a dark and oily presence that sought to worm its way into her mind. Around her, she saw others struggling against the influence, some stumbling, others shaking their heads as if to clear away cobwebs. "Stay focused," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of power that helped strengthen the resolve of those around her. "Remember who you are, what we're fighting for. Don't let them in." Kichi moved up beside her, his face grim but determined. "The scouts have returned," he reported in a low voice. "The council has gathered in the sacred grove. They've done something to it, Olathe. The trees are twisted, the earth scorched. It's like the land itself in pain." Olathe nodded, feeling a deep sadness at the desecration of such an ancient and holy place. Then that's where we make our stand, she said. Not just for ourselves, but for the land, for the balance we're sworn to protect. As they crested the final hill, the sacred grove came into view. What had once been a lush, vibrant center of shifter spirituality was now a nightmarish landscape. The ancient trees were bent and gnarled, their bark blackened as if by fire. At the center of the grove, a pulsing orb of dark energy hovered, tendrils of corruption spreading out from it like a malignant web. Gathered around this focal point were the members of the council, their forms shrouded in shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. And behind them, arrayed in rigid formation, were hundreds of shifters, their eyes glazed, movements jerky and unnatural. By the spirits, Niabi breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. What have they done to them? Slaves, Awenita said, her ancient eyes filled with sorrow. They've stripped away their free will, turned them into puppets for their dark ritual. Olathe felt a surge of anger, quickly tempered by compassion. Those shifters, they were victims, not enemies. Whatever happened here, she knew they had to find a way to free them from the council's control. As Olathe's group entered the outskirts of the grove, a figure detached itself from the council's ranks. Even at a distance, Olathe recognized him, Makpia, the council's leader, a man who had once been respected for his wisdom but who had fallen prey to the lure of power. So, Makpia's voice boomed across the unnatural silence of the grove. The prodigal daughter returns, with her band of malcontents and traitors. Have you come to beg forgiveness, Olathe? To take your rightful place in the new order we are creating? Olathe stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. We've come to stop you, Makpia. To remind you, all of you, of who we truly are. This isn't the way. You're destroying everything that makes us shifters. Everything we're meant to protect. Makpia laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Protect? We are meant to rule, child. The humans have squandered their stewardship of this world. It's time for a stronger hand to guide the future. As he spoke, the dark energy at the center of the grove pulsed, sending out a wave of corruptive force. Olathe felt it crash against her mental shields, seeking entry, promising power beyond imagination if she would only submit. But in that moment of pressure, Olathe found her center. She reached deep within herself, connecting to the pure, wild magic that was her birthright. Her tattoos began to glow, patterns shifting and flowing as she drew on the strength not just of her own lineage, but of all those who stood with her. No, she said, her voice resonating with power. That's not who we are. We're guardians, not conquerors. Bridges between worlds, not tyrants seeking to dominate them. As she spoke, Olathe felt the energy around her shift. The others in her group were drawing on their own inner strength, creating a network of light and purpose that stood in stark contrast to the council's dark manipulations. Makpia's expression twisted in rage. Enough of this foolishness, he snarled. You stand against the inevitable. Join us or be destroyed along with all who oppose the new order. With a gesture, he sent the enslaved shifters surging forward. But as they approached Olathe's group, something unexpected happened. The free shifters didn't fight back. Instead, they reached out, physically and mentally, seeking to connect with their enthralled brethren. Olathe led by example, stepping forward to meet the oncoming wave. As the first enslaved shifter reached her, she placed her hand on his forehead, channeling healing energy, reminding him of his true nature. Remember, she said softly, her words carrying to all those within reach. Remember who you are. You are not slaves. You are shifters, proud, free, connected to the earth and sky, and to each other by choice, not by force. The effect was immediate and profound. The enslaved shifter's eyes cleared, confusion giving way to recognition and then to horror at what had been done to him. As he stumbled back, others pressed forward, drawn not by the council's dark command, but by a desperate need for healing. All around the grove, similar scenes were playing out. Kichi, Niabi, Awenita, and the others were each focusing on breaking the council's hold, one shifter at a time. It was slow, exhausting work, but with each mind freed, their collective Strength grew. Machpia and the other council members watched in growing panic as their carefully constructed plan began to unravel. The dark orb at the center of the grove pulsed erratically, as if sensing the shift in the balance of power. "No!" Machpia roared, his form beginning to blur as he lost control of his shift. "I will not be denied. The power will be mine." He lunged towards the orb, hands outstretched as if to claim it for himself. But before he could reach it, a figure interposed itself between him and his goal. It was Elder Sequoia, his aged frame somehow standing tall and unbowed in the face of Machpia's rage. "Enough," the old wolf said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "This ends now." Machpia snarled, lunging at Sequoia with inhuman speed. But the elder stood his ground, drawing on a lifetime of discipline and a newfound connection to the true source of shifter power. As the two clashed, the very air around them seemed to warp and twist. Olathe could see the struggle playing out on both physical and spiritual levels, Machpia's corrupted strength against Sequoia's hard-won wisdom and rekindled spirit. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the outcome hung in the balance. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, something broke. Machpia stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and sudden comprehension. What have we done?" he whispered, looking around at the devastation they had wrought. Sequoia, battered but unbowed, placed a gentle hand on Machpia's shoulder. "We lost our way," he said softly, "but it's not too late to find it again." As the last of the enslaved shifters were freed from the council's control, Olathe made her way to the center of the grove. The dark orb still hovered there, its energies chaotic and unstable. "We need to unmake it," Awanita said, joining her. "But carefully. The backlash could be devastating if we're not prepared." Olathe nodded, understanding the gravity of the task before them. She reached out with her senses, feeling the twisted strands of power that made up the orb. It was an abomination, a perversion of the natural bonds between shifters and the spirit world. "I need everyone's help," she called out, her voice carrying across the now quiet grove. "Form a circle. Focus on your connection to the earth, to each other, to the spirit of what it truly means to be a shifter." As the others complied, Olathe felt a surge of energy. It wasn't the dark, corrupting force the council had tried to harness, but something purer, the collective will of hundreds of shifters, united in purpose. With Kichi on one side and Niabi on the other, Olathe reached out towards the orb. She didn't try to grasp it or control it. Instead, she opened herself up, becoming a conduit for the cleansing energy that flowed through the circle. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly at first but with gathering speed, the orb began to unravel. Dark tendrils dissipated, replaced by streams of light that flowed outward, sinking into the earth and rising towards the sky. As the last of the corruption faded away, a wave of renewal swept through the grove. Twisted trees straightened, blackened bark fell away to reveal healthy wood beneath. The very air seemed to lighten, filled with the scent of new growth and possibility. Olathe sank to her knees, exhausted but filled with a profound sense of accomplishment. Around her, others were embracing, laughing, crying, the joy of victory mingled with the release of long-held tensions. Kichi helped her to her feet, his eyes shining with pride and love. "You did it," he said softly. "You showed us the way." Olathe shook her head, smiling. "We did it," she corrected, "all of us together. This was never about one leader or one prophecy. It was about remembering who we are, what we're meant to be." As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the renewed grove, Olathe felt a familiar presence brush against her consciousness, the spirit of her mother, warm and approving. "The first battle is won," her mother's voice whispered. "But the journey is far from over. There is much healing to be done, much to rebuild." Olathe nodded, understanding the truth of those words. They had averted a catastrophe, but the work of transforming shifter society, of rebuilding connections with the human world and the spirit realm, was only beginning. But as she looked around at the faces of those gathered, shifters from different packs, humans who had stood with them, even former council members now freed from the grip of corrupted ambition, Olathe felt a surge of hope. They had remembered who they truly were. They had reclaimed their heritage as guardians and bridges between worlds. And in that remembering, in that reclaiming, lay the seeds of a new future, one built on genuine bonds, on respect for the balance of nature, and on the wild, beautiful magic that was their birthright. As night fell over the sacred grove, now truly sacred once more, Olathe knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a pack, as a people, united in their determination to forge a new path forward. The story of Shifterkind was far from over, but a new chapter had begun, full of possibility and promise. And Olathe, daughter of prophecy and catalyst of change, stood ready to help write it. 5 years had passed since the confrontation in the sacred grove. The world of shifters had undergone a profound transformation, though not without its challenges and setbacks. Olathe stood atop a hill overlooking a vast gathering, her heart swelling with pride and hope as she took in the scene before her. The valley below was filled with shifters from every pack, along with human allies and even representatives from other supernatural communities. They had come together for the first grand conclave, a celebration of their renewed connection to each other and to the spirit world. Kitchi approached, a warm smile on his face as he followed Olathe's gaze. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" he said, slipping his hand into hers. "There was a time I never thought I'd see anything like this." Olathe nodded, squeezing his hand. Their relationship had evolved over the years, moving from the ashes of their broken mate bond to something deeper and more genuine, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and freely chosen love. "We've come so far," she murmured, "but there's still so much to do." As if on cue, Niabi appeared, a datapad in her hand and a look of amused exasperation on her face. "The delegation from the European Pax has arrived," she reported. "They're eager to discuss the cross-continental ley line project, and the mermaid representatives are requesting another meeting about coastal conservation efforts." Olathe chuckled. "Never a dull moment. Tell them I'll be down shortly." As Niabi headed back to manage the logistics of the gathering, Olathe took a moment to reflect on the changes of the past 5 years. The dissolution of the council had left a power vacuum, but instead of rushing to fill it with another centralized authority, the shifter community had embraced a more organic, decentralized form of governance. Regional assemblies worked together on issues of common concern, while individual packs had the freedom to govern their internal affairs. The process hadn't been without conflict. Some packs, particularly those who had been deeply entrenched in the old ways, resisted the changes. There had been skirmishes, tense negotiations, and moments when it seemed like everything might unravel. But the memory of what they had nearly lost, their very essence as shifters, proved to be a powerful motivator. Slowly but surely, even the most reluctant packs began to see the benefits of the new way. One of the most profound changes had been the renewal of their connection to the spirit world. With the guidance of Awanita and other keepers of old knowledge, shifters were rediscovering abilities that had been lost or suppressed for generations. The sacred grove, once nearly destroyed by the council's dark ritual, had become a center of learning and healing. Shifters from all over the world came to study the old ways, to strengthen their bonds with nature and the spirit realm. But perhaps the most significant change had been in their relationship with the human world. No longer hiding in the shadows, shifters had begun to take a more active role as guardians of the natural world. Working in partnership with human conservationists, they were at the forefront of efforts to protect endangered species and ecosystems. This new openness had not been without its risks. There had been instances of fear and prejudice, attempts by some human groups to exploit or control shifter abilities. But there had also been moments of profound connection and mutual understanding. Olathe's thoughts were interrupted by a commotion from the gathering below. A group of young shifters, barely into their teens, were putting on an impromptu display of their abilities. They shifted fluidly between human and animal forms, their movements a graceful dance that spoke of harmony between their dual natures. "Remember when shifting used to be such a struggle?" Kitchi mused, watching the display. All that talk of controlling the beast within, of suppressing our animal natures. Olathe nodded, a touch of sadness in her smile. We wasted so much energy, fighting against ourselves. But look at them now, so at peace with who and what they are. As they made their way down to the gathering, Olathe and Kitchi were greeted warmly by shifters and humans alike. The atmosphere was one of celebration, but there was an undercurrent of purpose as well. This wasn't just a party, it was a working gathering, a chance to strengthen bonds and tackle the challenges that still lay ahead. Near the center of the gathering, Olathe spotted a familiar face. Elder Sequoia, his fur now more gray than black, was seated in a place of honor, surrounded by a group of young shifters hanging on his every word. And so, Sequoia was saying as they approached, we learned that true strength comes not from domination, but from connection. Not just to each other, but to the world around us, to the spirits that guide us, and to our own true natures. The young shifters nodded, their eyes wide with wonder. Olathe felt a surge of hope for the future. These youngsters would grow up knowing the truth of who they were, unburdened by the fears and misconceptions that had plagued previous generations. As the day wore on, Olathe found herself moving from one group to another, listening to concerns, offering advice, and sometimes just lending a sympathetic ear. It was exhausting work, but deeply fulfilling. During a rare quiet moment, she found herself standing at the edge of a small lake. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the sky above like a perfect mirror. As she gazed at her reflection, Olathe saw not just herself, but the faint outlines of those who had come before. Her mother, her grandmother, generations of shifters stretching back into the mists of time. You've done well, my daughter, a familiar voice whispered on the breeze. Olathe smiled, feeling the warm presence of her mother's spirit. We've done well, she corrected softly. All of us, together. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Olathe made her way to the central stage. A hush fell over the crowd as she took her place, all eyes turning to her. 5 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly, across the valley, we stood on the brink of losing everything that makes us who we are. We had forgotten our true purpose, lost touch with the magic that is our birthright. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled faces, shifters, humans, and other supernatural beings, all united in common purpose. But we remembered, Olathe continued, her voice gaining strength. We remembered that we are not meant to be conquerors or rulers but guardians, bridges between the physical world and the spirit realm, protectors of the wild places and the balance of nature. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The path we've chosen isn't always easy, Olathe acknowledged. We face challenges from within and without. There are those who fear us, those who would seek to use us for their own ends. And we ourselves are still learning, still growing, still healing from the wounds of the past. Her expression softened, filled with determination and hope. But look at how far we've come. Look at what we've accomplished when we work together, not just as shifters, but in partnership with humans and other beings who share our commitment to protecting this world. Olathe gestured to the valley around them, to the vibrant community that had gathered. This is who we are meant to be, not divided by artificial hierarchies or forced bonds, but united by choice, by shared purpose, by the wild and beautiful magic that flows through all of us. As she spoke, Olathe felt a surge of energy. It wasn't just her own power, but the collective will of all those gathered. The air seemed to shimmer, and for a moment, the veil between worlds thinned. Spirits danced at the edges of vision, a reminder of the greater reality they were all part of. We have much work still to do, Olathe concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. There are ecosystems to protect, bridges to build between communities, ancient knowledge to rediscover and apply to the challenges of our modern world. But I know that together there is nothing we cannot accomplish. A cheer went up from the gathering, a sound of joy and determination that seemed to shake the very mountains. As Olathe stepped down from the stage, she was engulfed in a wave of embraces and words of support. Later that night, as bonfires blazed and the celebration continued under the star-filled sky, Olathi found a quiet moment with Kichi, Niabi, and Awanita. They stood together, a small circle of friends who had been through so much. "So," Niabi said with a grin, "what's next? Saving the world? Brokering peace between vampires and werewolves?" Olathi laughed, feeling a lightness in her heart that had been rare in the early days of their struggle. "One step at a time," she said. "But you know, I have been thinking about that proposal from the Selkie colony in Scotland. Their coastal restoration project could use our help." Kichi groaned good-naturedly. "Don't tell me we're going to spend another winter in the cold North Atlantic." "Oh, stop complaining," Awanita chided, her eyes twinkling with mischief despite her advanced years. "A little cold water is good for keeping you young pups humble." As they bantered, Olathi felt a deep sense of contentment wash over her. This was what it was all about. Not grand destinies or epic battles, but moments like these. Friends and loved ones working together, tackling the world's challenges one day at a time. She thought back to that night in the sacred grove, when everything had seemed on the verge of being lost. They had come so far since then, had overcome so much, and yet, in many ways, their journey was just beginning. As the night wore on and the celebration continued around them, Olathi gazed up at the star-filled sky. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges. But whatever came their way, she knew they would face it together, as a pack, as a community, as guardians of the balance between worlds. The story of shifter kind was far from over. But this chapter, a chapter of awakening, of remembering, of forging a new path, was one that would be told for generations to come. And Olathi, once a reluctant catalyst for change, now stood ready to help write the next pages of that ongoing tale. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Olathi felt a renewed sense of purpose. The new day brought with it new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and she was ready to meet them, surrounded by friends, supported by community, and guided by the wild, beautiful magic that was the true heritage of all shifters. The journey continued, and the best was yet to come.